defendant was driving on Highway 80 and came up and started tailgating two individuals into one vehicle.
First up, we're in Roseville, California, for the arraignment of Deirdre Orozco. The 50-year-old was charged with multiple crimes, including reckless driving, assault with a deadly weapon, and resisting arrest, following a dangerous road rage incident captured on cell phone video.
Go past her.
I'm not pulling over. Dude!
Orozco's driving the silver truck. And just moments earlier, the passenger of this car flipped her the bird after she allegedly cut off her friend who's behind the wheel.
Oh my God!
Oh my God, go, 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 go.
This is the craziest shit
I've never seen anything like this.
I hope all these cars are calling the cops. Like, I have to drive fast to, like, get in front of her.
I know.
Like, I almost want to stop and pull over and exit.
No, because then she'll get out of the car.
Dude, I don't know what to do!
As Orozco swerves and tries to pin in their vehicle,
I'm not...
Just drive. Just keep driving.
Dude.
I know, just keep driving as well as you can. You're fine, I promise.
the passenger puts in a call to 911.
Hi, we have a really bad emergency on Highway 80, and we're right now passing Dutch Flats Road. We have a vehicle that has been following us, and it's swerving in front of us. Yes, we're in the white Mazda. Yes, ma'am. And she's swerving us off the road. She keeps trying to hit us off the road.
I'm freaking out. Dude, she's so silly.
Yes. She just hit our car. She's pushing us off of the road. Yes, she's pushing us off the road. She's coming for us.
After ramming their car, Orozco blocks them in.
Put it in reverse. Put it in reverse, Vanessa. Put it in reverse.
Then jumps out of her car and heads right for them.
No. They're telling us to exit. They're telling us to exit.
She's speeding in front of me, dude.
We don't know what to do. Go. The CHP office is off of Dutch Flat. She's saying go straight to the CHP office.
Dude, she's so
But racing toward the next exit, they see Orozco gaining on them in the rearview mirror.
Please make sure somebody's right there. She's crazy.
right behind.
And then, okay, she's gonna hit us. There's an officer parked right here in the vehicle. Can he help us, please? Can he help us? Please. Go to the officer. Go to the officer. Go to the officer. Okay. Please. Make sure he helps us, please. Help us. Please. Can we get away from her, John? Sorry, I'm scared.
When confronted by police, Orozco claimed she was just trying to make a citizen's arrest of the other driver, who she said was texting and driving erratically. Ultimately, after resisting officers, Orozco was arrested and taken into custody. Now, 3 days later at her arraignment, Orozco's bizarre behavior continues as she signs, "I love you," then flashes a big smile for the camera.
The defendant was driving on Highway 80.
Then, as details of the incident are read, she appears to act out the very actions that landed her in court.
And came up and started tailgating two individuals into one vehicle.
When given a chance to speak, Orozco does have two requests. One, she wants things handled quickly.
Whatever's the most expeditious way, that's what I want to do.
And two, rather than the state's proposed $500,000 bond, she throws out an unsolicited counteroffer.
Let's put it at 100.
Deirdre Orozco was held on the $500,000 bond, and later pled no contest to assault with a deadly weapon and the amended charge of making threats to commit a crime resulting in death. She was sentenced to 925 days in county jail with credit for time served, 5 years probation. Next, we go to a juvenile hearing in Clinton County, Ohio. The defendant, Chance Macko, who's 17, was charged with grand theft auto and robbery. A year earlier, Macko, along with two other teens, allegedly escaped from a halfway house where he was being held on a misdemeanor theft charge, stole a truck, then took police on a high-speed chase. The chase ended when Macko crashed the vehicle into an apartment building. The teen was reportedly under the influence at the time of the incident, but thankfully no one was injured. Today, the shackled defendant sits before Magistrate Mark Myers. That's Jim Buckner, the court bailiff, who puts his hand on the defendant just before he approaches the bench. Macko doesn't seem to appreciate it and reportedly says to Buckner, "You don't put your hands on me." That's when Buckner makes his move. He grabs the defendant and puts him in a headlock. Buckner then pulls Macko further back on the chair, not letting go of his neck. Eventually, the defendant hits the floor. But it's not over. Buckner drags the teen across the floor and straight out the door. But this isn't where the story ends. A deputy who was in the courtroom reported the incident to the sheriff's office, who later sent the video to the state's attorney general. In exchange for no criminal charges, Buckner resigned and surrendered his peace training certification, which means he can no longer work as an Ohio peace officer. As for Macko, he pled guilty to 2 counts of grand theft auto and 1 count of robbery. He was sentenced to a total of 72 months in prison. Next, we're in Leesburg, Virginia, for a domestic violence trial. 26-year-old James Phillips was charged with assault and battery against a family or household member for allegedly punching his girlfriend in the face during an argument. With 2 previous domestic violence convictions already, Phillips' charge is enhanced to a felony, punishable by up to 5 years in prison. The prosecution's first witness is the alleged victim, 33-year-old Katie Orndorff.
How long have you been in a relationship with Mr. Phillips?
Roughly maybe like 3 months, 6 months, something along those lines.
And can you describe for the jury and for the court what sort of relationship you were in with Mr. Phillips?
Romantic, or, boyfriend, girlfriend.
Seeming a bit nervous on the stand, Katie describes how 2 months earlier, she and Phillips got into an argument in her car as she was driving him home from dinner.
What does an argument mean for you?
Verbally, like yelling and screaming.
And what do you remember happening at that point?
So I know he hit me twice in the face, and I know I got a bruise on one. The second one, there was blood coming from my nose.
Now, during cross-examination, Phillips' lawyer attempts to poke holes in some of Orndorff's previous testimony.
Ms. Orndorff, you said that you did not actually have your phone, that Mr. Phillips was in possession of it, correct?
It was actually, I guess I misworded it. It was on the little hook, the holder.
Now, Ms. Orndorff, so you are now reversing your testimony and saying you did know where your phone was.
I did not say that I didn't know where my phone was. If I did, I meant that he wasn't allowing me to call 911, whether or not.
Once again, if you could just focus on the questions for me.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Your testimony previously was that Mr. Phillips had your cell phone, correct?
Bottom line is, in the day, he punched me in the face twice, and I just
asked you to focus on the questions at hand.
After more back and forth,
I don't understand what
you were telling Mr. Phillips that he was going to learn his lesson.
The bruise on my face,
Phillips' attorney asked the judge for a sidebar.
Ms. Orndorff, please, I'm going to object to the matter. Your Honor, I think that at this time we should call a sidebar in the matter.
All right, I'll tell you what we're going to do. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take our afternoon recess.
With the jury out of the room, Judge James Fisher keeps the alleged victim on the hot seat.
Ms. Orndorff, I've been looking at your demeanor and how you testified today. You appear to me to be under the influence of narcotics or some other type of substance. Have you taken any medicines or narcotics? Excuse me, listen to my question. Have you taken any medicines or narcotics or anything else that would influence you today?
I I recently came off all of my medication and antidepressants and stabilizer. It's affecting me.
In what way?
I feel very stressed and anxiety with this whole situation because regardless of being revengeful and spiteful, it happened. These things.
That's not the question, and this is kind of an example of not being responsive to my question. I want to know what you've taken prior to today. Prior to coming in here today, that's affected your demeanor.
Honestly, I smoke marijuana.
Recreational marijuana is legal in Virginia, but that doesn't seem to matter to Judge Fisher.
Smoked marijuana at what time today?
Huh?
Listen to my question. You smoked marijuana prior to your testimony today?
Before I even got in the car and came here.
Not the answer the judge was looking for.
Court finds you in contempt of court.
Me?
We're going to sentence you to 10 days in the county jail and the remainder of your custody.
Me?
We're going to take a recess at this time, and we're going to hear a legal argument.
Oh my God! I didn't even do anything! What am I supposed to do? I don't understand.
Moments after the video ends, Katie Orndorff was placed in handcuffs and taken into custody. She would spend 2 days in jail before bonding out, filing a motion to vacate her contempt charge. Judge James Fisher refused to hear the motion, but ultimately came under fire himself, for in effect silencing an alleged victim of domestic violence. Witnesses in court, including the prosecutor and sheriff's deputies, claimed Orndorff did not seem impaired, but was just nervous testifying a few feet away from her alleged abuser. Despite calls for impeachment from protesters in the community, Judge Fisher remains on the bench. The case against James Phillips was ruled a mistrial. A second trial is now pending.
There are no number of apologies or prayers that will ever convince me that the guy who did this is innocent.
Next, we go to Tampa, Florida for a competency hearing. The defendant, Mykese Morse, has been charged with 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder. 2 months earlier, Morse allegedly drove his vehicle off the road and intentionally struck 42-year-old Pedro Aguiberry, who was out cycling with his 2 young sons. The husband and father died from the collision. The 2 boys survived with minor injuries. Morse ditched his vehicle, but was arrested hours later at his parents' house. His parents claimed their son had been struggling with mental illness for years. Morse pled not guilty, but before the case can move forward, Judge Mark Kaiser orders a psychological evaluation to determine if Morse is competent to stand trial. Morse is present at the hearing and uses the opportunity to make a surprise statement to the judge.
On June 12th, before I even got in the situation I'm here, I was to be seen between 12:30 and 4:30 on Orient Road in Hillsborough.
Mr. Morse,
I committed a murder.
Morse appears to be trying to confess to a murder, but there's one major problem. It's not the murder of Pedro Aguiberry, for which he's charged.
I committed a murder.
I'm going to stop you. I'm going to stop you right now. You need to stop.
You on the Hard Rock Casino.
You need to stop
and they're
talking right now.
Okay, I'm sorry. I need to say this.
The judge does his best to silence him, but the defendant continues.
You're not going to be able to stay in the courtroom if we're going to talk over each other.
I need to get this off my chest, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Morse. You need to stop talking.
Finally, the judge decides there's only one way to stop Morse from speaking.
Mr. Morse, I'm going to have you taken out of the courtroom since you're not able to stop talking.
I'm not saying anything.
All right, we're going to have you just removed, and we'll call you back in just a minute.
Once Morse is removed, police follow up on the details of this new murder confession, but find nothing that suggests he's telling the truth, and no additional charges are filed. Morse was eventually deemed competent to stand trial. And 2.5 years later, he would change his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. Psychiatrists for both the state and defense evaluate Morse and view some of his social media postings from the time of the incident.
Yeah, devil, this is all your fault. Yeah, devil, this is all your fault. all your fault because you descended to earth.
Doctors from both sides agree Morse was legally insane at the time of the incident.
He did not know or appreciate the nature of his actions and its consequences, nor did he appreciate the wrongfulness of his behavior.
The medical ruling provides little solace to Pedro's heartbroken widow, who makes an emotional statement to the court.
There are no number of apologies or prayers that will ever convince me that the guy who did this is innocent. More than just a life was taken from us that day.
Next, it's the defendant who speaks remotely to the victim's wife.
I really regret not getting the help that I needed beforehand, before this happened. I'm sincerely sorry that I caused you this pain.
And with that, Judge Kaiser announces his ruling.
At this point in time, the court has entered the finding of not guilty by reason of insanity.
Lyquise Morse avoids a prison sentence, but he's currently in a mental health facility where he continues to receive treatment. He will not leave that facility until and unless it's determined he's no longer suffering from mental illness and would not be a threat to the community.
How do you wish to plead to murder in the second? Guilty? Yes, sir.
We're in Saginaw, Michigan, where 51-year-old Stephen Sanderson just pled guilty to the murder of another inmate inside a state correctional facility. 10 months earlier, Sanderson, who was already serving life without parole for the 1991 murder of his girlfriend, attacked and strangled his 67-year-old cellmate. He says he did it for a very specific reason.
The reason I killed him was because he was a child molester.
His cellmate, Theodore Dyer, was convicted of first-degree criminal sexual conduct in 2014 for molesting a 9-year-old girl who lived next door to him.
He was my bunkie, and I had found out that he was in prison for child molestation. Really bad case. So that night he was trying to justify why he did it, and I just told him to be quiet, and he would have to leave in the morning to find a new cell. But he continued to talk about it and try to justify it. So he was a little bit bigger than me, so I got down and I hit him in his face a few times. And when he fell, I wrapped a cord around his neck and I took his life.
As a formality of his guilty plea, Sanderson's lawyer then confirms the basics.
But you didn't kill him? Oh, sure. And you intended to kill him? Oh, sure, yes.
2 weeks later at sentencing, Sanderson's matter-of-fact demeanor continues as he addresses the public response he received following the murder.
Since this all happened, it's kind of been, people think I'm some kind of hero when I'm actually not. I just, did what I thought was best in the time that I was given. I don't feel bad for what I did, I feel bad for maybe his family or something. But as far as remorse towards him, no.
Sanderson then claims Theodore Dyer's real judgment is still to come.
I've been getting these emails saying that, it's not my position to judge anybody. And I want to make it quite clear that I didn't judge him. I know God is the only judge we have. I just set the appointment up.
Without comment, the judge then issued Stephen Sanderson the maximum penalty of an additional life sentence to be added to his previous sentence of life without parole.
That's it for this edition of Court Cam. I'm Dan Abrams. Thanks for watching. Hi everyone, I'm Dan Abrams, and this is Court Cam.
You ready to take your plea?
First up, we got a bond hearing in Camden, New Jersey. The defendant, 24-year-old Julio Martinez, is charged with murder. A few days earlier, Martinez allegedly broke into the apartment of his estranged girlfriend, Sofia Ortiz, and using a 9-inch blade, stabbed her multiple times. The couple's 2 young children witnessed the attack, but were unharmed. Only a week before, Sofia obtained a restraining order against her ex. Martinez was captured the next day and charged with murder. Today, Martinez stands in front of the victim's family, hoping to be released on bond. But Assistant Prosecutor Christine Shaw argues against it, pointing to the defendant's record and suggesting he's a possible flight risk.
He's already been adjudicated delinquent for escaping, and he was hiding at the time that he was arrested. He's obviously a flight risk. He's already been adjudicated delinquent for escaping.
That's 17-year-old Fabian Ortiz, the victim's cousin, sliding over towards the defendant.
He's obviously a flight risk.
An airborne Ortiz nearly makes it over the railing. But the quick responding bailiffs send him to the ground. It's clear Martinez knows he's the target. It takes at least 4 men to subdue the teen and remove him from court. Minutes later, after order is restored, and with a bailiff now positioned in front of the gallery, the defendant is brought back, and Shaw continues her argument.
He will not stop no matter what, so I would ask that the court keep his bail at $1 million. Thank you.
When both sides are finished, the judge makes his decision.
He has a juvenile record also, as well as a prior adult record. I find because he has a state conviction, he is a flight risk. For that reason, I'm going to set bail at this time of $1 million, cash or bond.
After the judge makes his ruling, Martinez is taken into custody and ultimately pleads guilty to aggravated manslaughter. He's sentenced to 28 years in prison. As for Sophia's cousin Fabian, no charges are brought against him. Next, we head to Muskegon County, Michigan for a pretrial hearing. The defendant, Giovanni Jones, is charged with exposing himself to 2 employees at the county jail where he's being held on a pending rape charge. A month earlier, staff members claimed they arrived at Jones's cell with medication, only to find Jones allegedly fondling himself. Jones then placed his penis in the door hatch and yelled an obscenity. Jones, however, claims he was just washing himself. He appears today with his attorney, Angela Dormeyer, before Judge Maria Ladas Hoops. He's being disrupted, and the judge is starting to lose her patience.
Excuse me, I want to have a minute.
Stop. Sir, you cannot interrupt the court proceeding unless you want to be informed. She will be attentive to you in terms of answering any questions you have, but you don't get to.
It only takes a few minutes before Jones starts up again.
Excuse me. Yeah, but I have a constitutional right to say that I want to testify about what was said, and so.
Sir, I'm going to let you talk to your attorney for a brief moment.
Okay. Well, first of all,
sir,
before I talk to her,
all right, that's it. I'm holding you in contempt.
A contempt charge could get Jones another 90 days in jail, but that's not stopping him.
I know I'm only in contempt and I have a constitutional right to represent myself, but I never signed any paper for attorney representation. So, I don't know exactly what was going on, but I do what I testify, like I First Amendment, Sixth Amendment, Eighth Amendment, and 14th Amendment right to represent myself, Judge.
The judge has finally had enough.
All right, look it. Stop right now.
A bailiff steps over to offer some advice.
Mr. Jones, listen to the judge.
All right, sir. Sir, I'm going to hold you in contempt. Right. Yes, sir, you have the right at this time.
I'm not sure what's the line. This is what y'all do all the time. Y'all harass me. time he's supposed to be in jail.
Jones was later convicted of indecent exposure and sent to jail for 252 days. He was also found guilty on the rape charge, and because he's a fourth-time offender, was sentenced to 62 years in a state prison. Next, we join a virtual court hearing in St. Joseph County, Michigan.
People versus Kobe James Harris. Is that you, sir?
Yes, Your Honor.
21-year-old Kobe Harris was charged with assault with intent to cause great bodily harm for allegedly assaulting his girlfriend and threatening to hit her with a metal pipe during an argument at her apartment.
That is a felony punishable by up to 10 years imprisonment and a fine of up to $5,000. You're charged as a second habitual offender, making that a maximum 15-year offense.
Harris is currently out on bond with a protection order placed against him for the alleged victim's safety. Her name and identity are being withheld for privacy.
Do you see Kobe in the virtual courtroom here today? And if you're on a phone, it's right to the right. And on that day, was there an argument between you and Kobe?
Yeah.
Asking the questions is Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Deborah Davis.
And during the course of the argument, what happened?
I mean, it wasn't even a very long argument. We just kind of both got really angry. It was just kind of like an accusative argument, just like, I don't know.
Did the police come to your apartment that night?
They did, yeah.
And why did they come to the apartment?
Because the police were called, so they came here.
Who called the police?
I mean, technically me.
But following the alleged victim's series of evasive responses, the prosecutor senses something is wrong based on what she's seeing.
Your Honor, I have reason to believe that the defendant is in the same apartment as the complaining witness right now, and I'm extremely scared for her safety. The fact that she's looking off to the side and he's moving around, I want some confirmation that she is safe before we continue.
Miss, where are you right now? What's the address?
As Judge Jeffrey Middleton investigates what could be a potentially dangerous situation, an officer can be seen making an impromptu phone call.
Mr. Harris, where are you?
3 East Lafayette, Your Honor.
All right, I want you to walk out to the front of the house. Show me the house number on the house.
Why? I don't even think this phone has charge for that, sir. I'm at like 2% right now. I'm hooked up to this wall charger right here.
While Harris refuses the judge's request, it becomes clear who the officer was phoning just moments earlier.
The police are at Miss apartment right now, knocking on the door.
All right. Miss, would you go answer the door?
Yeah, give me 1 second.
You take your phone with you so that I know you're okay.
The alleged victim walks to the door and speaks with officers before her phone abruptly shuts off. Then, with all eyes on Harris, he appears nervous before standing up and shutting his phone off. Moments later, Kobe Harris rejoins the conversation.
Your Honor.
As he's being handcuffed by police.
Yes?
Your Honor, me and both don't want the no contact. I asked that be dropped. I'm sorry I lied to you. I knew the cops were outside. Don't want the no contact.
Prosecutor Davis's reaction pretty much says it all. Harris was in another room at the alleged victim's residence, just as she suspected.
I don't know why I lied.
Mr. Harris, my advice is don't say anything else. Take the cigarette out of your mouth. The hearing is adjourned. Your bond is canceled.
Harris is in clear violation of his bond terms, which included a protection order that prohibited him from coming within 500 feet of the alleged victim.
It's the first time I ever had anybody sitting in the next room potentially intimidating a witness and assault great bodily harm. Officers are directed to take him into custody on a bond violation.
2 weeks later, the hearing is continued, this time with Harris signing in from county jail. Kobe Harris's original charge of assault with intent to cause great bodily harm was later dropped, but he was found guilty of domestic violence with prior offenses and sentenced to 14 months to 5 years in prison. He was also found guilty of witness bribery, intimidation, or interfering, and was sentenced to 5 months to run concurrent with his other sentence. Next, we're in Detroit, Michigan, for the sentencing of Latrez Cummings. The 19-year-old pled guilty to assault with intent to do great bodily harm for his role in the violent beating of 54-year-old Stephen Utash. 6 months earlier, Utash was driving in his truck when he inadvertently hit a 10-year-old boy who stepped out onto the street. He immediately stopped, but as he went to check on the boy, who suffered a broken leg, he was attacked by a large group of bystanders who'd witnessed the accident, including Latrez Cummings. The mob viciously punched, kicked, and stomped Utash, leaving him unconscious. Utash sustained life-threatening head injuries and was placed in a medically induced coma for 10 days following the attack. 6 weeks later, he was released from the hospital after reportedly making a full recovery, as did the 10-year-old boy who'd been injured. 5 people were ultimately charged with assault with intent to murder. Bruce Wimbush, who was 17 at the time of the attack, agreed to testify against the other defendants and pled guilty to the lesser charge of assault with intent to do great bodily harm. He was sentenced to 3 years of intensive probation in a youth offender program. The remaining defendants also pled guilty to the reduced charge as part of an agreement with the prosecution. An unnamed 16-year-old was sentenced to 90 days in juvenile detention. 35-year-old James Davis received a year in jail, and 30-year-old Wanzi Saffold received an enhanced sentence of 6 years and 4 months to 10 years because of previous felony convictions. Now, the 19-year-old Latrez Cummings is the last of 5 men charged with the assault to be sentenced. With a prior record as a juvenile, prosecutor Lisa Lindsay argues his penalty should be more than just a slap on the wrist.
Bottom line, Judge, there is nothing in this pre-sentence report favorable for this young man. Nothing that would dictate he be shown any type of leniency.
The sentencing guidelines only recommend 5 to 23 months in jail by taking into account, among other things, Cummings' relatively young age and difficult childhood.
I notice you don't have a father listed on the PSI. You did not have a father?
He's not in my life. He resided with his father for a short period of time, but the housing condition was deplorable. He was taken from the father at the court police, subsequently placed, and then returned to the biological mother.
Judge James Callahan then seems to cut the defendant a little slack.
That's what you have needed in your life as a father. Someone to discipline you. Someone to beat the hell out of you when you made a mistake, as opposed to allowing you or encouraging you to do it to somebody else. We've all been 19 years of age at some point in time in our lives. It might be different for a young lady, but for a young man, without the guidance of a father, being 19 years of age, I can understand how some of these problems have existed in the past.
After remaining silent while Cummings' family history was discussed, prosecutor Lisa Lindsay speaks up.
That's no excuse, Judge. How many times do we have to give him a chance before somebody seriously ends up in prison? There are plenty of young black males who did not have a father, who live in the city of Detroit, who do not behave the way this man behaves. And the fact that he did not have a father, the fact that he is a young black male, does not give him the right to engage in criminal activity.
Did I at any time in what I was saying, when I was so rudely interrupted, use the term black?
It doesn't matter. We see.
Did I ever use that term?
You don't have to use that term, Judge. We can see. We all have eyes.
It doesn't make any difference whether the person is black, white, yellow, or red.
It does not. an excuse to go out and commit crime, nor is it a reason to show him leniency.
Despite the prosecutor's impassioned argument, Judge Callahan sentenced Latrez on the low end of the guideline to 6 months in county jail and 3 years probation.
I know a lot of people, I'm sure, think the only money we should waste on you, Mr. Tingley, is the cost of a bullet.
Next, we're in Jackson, Michigan, for the sentencing of James Tingley. The 70-year-old was found guilty of multiple counts of criminal sexual conduct for molesting his neighbor's 2 underage daughters over a 6-year period. Joining Tingley as a co-defendant is the father of the 2 victims, Randy Stevens. He was also found guilty of sexual abuse, including 5 counts of abusing one of his daughters, 3 counts of aiding and abetting Tingley by giving him access to his daughters in exchange for money. Authorities learned of the abuse when the children alerted their foster parents of what was taking place.
To him, children are nothing more than animals. Animals to sell, to trade their bodies. They're not the animals. He is the animal. He is the man that deserves to be locked up in a cage for the rest of his life.
Now, James Tingley is the first of the 2 men to be sentenced. During his trial, it was revealed that his abuse of young girls extends well beyond the charges in this case.
Mr. Tingley, you've been molesting children for the last 40 to 50 years. From the trial, we know that there's at least 5 other victims than what we dealt with here.
After Tingley forgoes his option to speak, Judge Thomas Wilson does not hold back.
Mr. Tingley, basically you're a monster who has destroyed the innocence of numerous children. Unfortunately, they have to live with what was done to them the rest of their lives. The lucky ones will realize that they did nothing wrong, that they were just the victims of a sick pedophile. But it's going to have long-term impacts on all these little girls that were molested.
Before handing down the sentence, the judge then gets something else off his chest.
I know a lot of people, I'm sure, think the only money we should waste on you, Mr. Tingley, is the cost of a bullet. But I think it's worth every penny to lock you up for the rest of your life.
James Tingley was then sentenced to 20 to 50 years in prison for criminal sexual conduct charges. As for Randy Stevens, he was sentenced to 39 to 60 years from the Michigan Department of Corrections.
That's it for this edition of Court Cam. I'm Dan Abrams. Thanks for watching.